Sometimes the most heartbreaking truths come out right before we lose someone forever. And that's exactly what happened when Malcolm Jamal Warner, the beloved actor who played Theo Huxtable in The Cosby Show, sat down for what would become his final interview about the man who shaped his entire career. Just weeks before his tragic death in Costa Rica, Malcolm opened up like never before about the complex, painful relationship he had with Bill Cosby.
Bill Cosby lost his temper with a publicist Thursday who interrupted when the AP was questioning him.
And what he revealed wasn't just shocking, it was absolutely heartbreaking. Because after years of staying quiet, of trying to balance loyalty with truth, Malcolm finally spoke about what it was really like being part of America's favorite TV family while watching his father figure's world crumble. And the details he shared, they paint a picture that nobody was prepared for. You see, when Malcolm drowned off the coast of Costa Rica on July 20th, 2025, at just 54 years old, the entertainment world didn't just lose a talented actor. We lost someone who carried the weight of one of Hollywood's most complicated legacies on his shoulders for decades. And in his final interviews, Malcolm wasn't holding back anymore. He talked about the phone calls that kept him awake at night, the conversations that made him question everything he thought he knew about the man who mentored him, and the impossible position he found himself in when over 60 women came forward with allegations against Bill Cosby. But here's where the story gets really complicated, because Malcolm's relationship with Cosby wasn't just professional, it was deeply personal. Cosby had been there for Malcolm since he was a teenager, guiding his career, celebrating his victories, and treating him like the son he'd lost when Ennis Cosby was murdered in 1997. So when the sexual assault allegations started piling up in 2014, Malcolm found himself in an impossible situation that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The interview that's been making waves was recorded just 3 months before Malcolm's death. And honestly, it's painful to watch because you can see the toll that this whole situation took on him. Malcolm had spent over 30 years trying to navigate the complicated feelings of loving someone who might have done terrible things. And in this final interview, he finally let his guard down and talked about what that really felt like. "You have to understand," Malcolm said, and his voice was already breaking.
"Bill wasn't just my TV dad, he was my real mentor. He was the one who taught me about professionalism, about treating everyone on set with respect, about the responsibility that comes with being in the public eye." And then these allegations came out, and suddenly I'm supposed to just throw away everything I experienced with him. And that's where the disturbing details really start to come out, because Malcolm talked about how Cosby would call him regularly, even after the allegations surfaced. And these weren't just casual check-ins, they were intense conversations where Cosby would talk about his legacy, about how history would remember him, and about the pain of watching everything he'd built come crashing down. "He would call me at all hours," Malcolm revealed, and honestly, the way he described these conversations was chilling. Sometimes he'd be crying, sometimes he'd be angry, but the hardest part was when he'd ask me directly, "Malcolm, do you still believe in me?" And I didn't know what to say, because how do you tell someone who shaped your entire life that you're not sure anymore? But here's what really got to me about Malcolm's final interview. He talked about how the allegations didn't just affect his relationship with Cosby, they affected his entire identity. Because for so many people, Malcolm wasn't just an actor. He was Theo Huxtable. He was part of this perfect TV family that represented success and values and the American dream. And when that image got shattered, Malcolm felt like he lost a part of himself too. "People don't understand the psychological impact," Malcolm explained, and you could hear the exhaustion in his voice. "For years, I've had fans come up to me and say, 'The Cosby Show changed my life.' And now I have to wonder, was all of that built on a lie? Were we all just props in some elaborate performance while something darker was happening behind the scenes?" The most disturbing detail that Malcolm shared was about a conversation he had with Cosby in 2018, right after the conviction. And I'm not gonna lie, this part of the interview was hard to get through. Malcolm said that Cosby called him from prison, and instead of showing remorse or taking responsibility, he was focused on his legacy and how people would remember The Cosby Show. He wasn't talking about the victims, Malcolm said, and the pain in his eyes was obvious.
He wasn't talking about making amends or acknowledging the harm that was done. He was talking about ratings and syndication deals and whether the show would survive all of this. And that's when I realized that maybe I never really knew him at all. But wait, because this gets even more complicated. Malcolm also revealed that other cast members were struggling with the same feelings. He talked about conversations with Phylicia Rashad, Keshia Knight-Pulliam, and the rest of the Cosby Show family, and how they were all trying to figure out how to honor their experiences while not dismissing the experiences of the women who came forward. We were all walking this impossible tightrope.
Malcolm said,
Because on one hand, our experiences with Bill were real. He really did mentor us. He really did create opportunities for Black actors. He really did change television. But on the other hand, these women's experiences were real too. And there's no way to reconcile those two realities. And here's something that really got to me. Malcolm talked about how the whole situation affected his own relationship with his daughter. He said that she would ask him questions about Cosby, about why people were saying bad things about her daddy's TV grandfather, and he didn't know how to explain it to her. How do you tell a child that someone they've seen you respect and love might have done terrible things? Malcolm asked, and honestly, I don't think there's a good answer to that question. How do you explain that sometimes the people who are good to you can be harmful to others? It's a conversation no parent wants to have. The interview also revealed something that nobody knew before. Malcolm had actually distanced himself from Cosby in the final years. He stopped taking the regular phone calls, stopped visiting, and essentially cut off contact because he couldn't handle the emotional toll anymore. I felt guilty about it,
Malcolm admitted,
because Bill is getting older, and part of me felt like I was abandoning him when he needed support the most. But I also had to protect my own mental health. I had to protect my family. And I couldn't keep being pulled into this nightmare that seemed to have no end. But here's the thing that makes this whole story even more tragic. Malcolm never got to fully work through these feelings. He died while still carrying this massive emotional burden, while still trying to figure out how to honor his own experiences while respecting the experiences of Cosby's alleged victims. And the timing of his death makes it even more heartbreaking, because Malcolm had finally started to find some peace. In that final interview, he talked about how he was working on a book about his experiences, not just with the Cosby Show, but with navigating fame and identity and the complicated relationships that come with being in the public eye.
I want people to understand that it's possible to hold two truths at the same time,
Malcolm said, and this may have been the most important thing he ever said publicly. It's possible to acknowledge that someone did good things for you while also acknowledging that they might have done terrible things to others. The human experience is complicated, people are complicated, and we have to learn to live with that complexity instead of demanding simple answers to complicated questions. When news of Malcolm's death broke, Bill Cosby issued a statement through his spokesperson talking about how devastated he was and how Malcolm had been like a son to him. And honestly, reading that statement, knowing what Malcolm had shared in his final interview, was just devastating. Because it showed that even at the end, Cosby was still focused on his own grief instead of acknowledging the pain that his actions had caused to the people who loved him. The other cast members have been grieving publicly, sharing memories and photos, and talking about how much Malcolm meant to them. But underneath all of those tributes, you can feel the weight of everything that went unsaid, everything that Malcolm was still carrying when he died. Phylicia Rashad, who played his TV mom, posted a photo of Malcolm as a teenager with the caption, "My son, my heart." And Keshia Knight-Pulliam shared a video of Malcolm performing music, talking about how talented and complicated and beautiful he was. But none of them directly addressed the elephant in the room, the fact that Malcolm died while still processing the trauma of watching his father figure fall from grace. And that's what makes this whole story so heartbreaking, because Malcolm Jamal Warner wasn't just another celebrity dealing with scandal. He was someone he genuinely loved and respected, Bill Cosby, who had built his entire identity around being part of this perfect TV family, and who then had to watch as that perfect image got destroyed by allegations of horrific crimes. In his final interview, Malcolm said something that's been stuck in my head since I watched it. He said, "I wish I could separate the art from the artist, but I can't. Because I wasn't just consuming the art, I was part of creating it. And now I have to live with the fact that something I helped build might have been used to hurt people." The complexity of Malcolm's situation is something that most of us will never have to deal with. Most of us can watch a movie or TV show and then find out that someone involved did something terrible, and we can just stop watching. But Malcolm couldn't separate himself from the Cosby Show because he was the Cosby Show. His face is forever linked to this complicated legacy, and there was no way for him to escape that. And the saddest part? Malcolm was finally starting to find his own voice, separate from Theo Huxtable and separate from his relationship with Bill Cosby. He had been working on music, producing shows, and really coming into his own as an artist. But he never got the chance to fully step into that new identity because he died while still carrying the weight of his past. The entertainment industry has been mourning Malcolm's death, but they've also been grappling with the complicated legacy he leaves behind. Because Malcolm represented something that we don't see very often in Hollywood. Someone who is willing to hold space for complexity, who is willing to say that human relationships are messy, and that it's possible to love someone who might have done terrible things. In his final weeks, Malcolm had been working on a documentary about the Cosby Show and its impact on American culture. And according to people close to the project, he was planning to address the allegations directly, to talk about what it was like to be part of this beloved show while also grappling with the possibility that its creator was a predator. Malcolm wanted to be honest. Someone close to the project told reporters he wanted to acknowledge the good that the Cosby Show did for representation and for Black families, but he also wanted to acknowledge the pain that came with learning about the allegations. He didn't want to erase either part of the story. But now we'll never see that documentary. We'll never get Malcolm's full perspective on this complicated situation. And that feels like another tragedy on top of an already tragic situation. When I think about Malcolm Jamal Warner's legacy, I don't just think about Theo Huxtable or his music or his later acting work. I think about his willingness to sit with discomfort, to acknowledge complexity, and to admit that he didn't have all the answers. In a world where everyone wants simple explanations and clear heroes and villains, Malcolm was willing to say that sometimes the people we love do terrible things, and we have to figure out how to live with that knowledge. His death in Costa Rica was ruled accidental. He was caught in a strong current while swimming and couldn't be saved. But in a way, Malcolm had been drowning for years, pulled under by the weight of a legacy that he helped create but couldn't control. And his final interview shows us that he was still fighting to keep his head above water when the ocean finally claimed him. The disturbing details that Malcolm shared about Bill Cosby weren't just about the allegations or the phone calls or the complicated emotions. They were about the human cost of hero worship, about what happens when the people we look up to let us down in the most devastating ways possible. And they were about the impossible situation that victims and survivors and complicated witnesses find themselves in when trying to navigate trauma and loyalty and love and grief all at the same time. Malcolm Jamal Warner deserved better. He deserved to work through his complicated feelings about Bill Cosby without the pressure of public scrutiny. He deserved to define his own legacy instead of being forever tied to someone else's rise and fall. And he deserved to live long enough to find peace with the complexity of his own story. But maybe, in sharing his truth in that final interview, Malcolm did find a kind of peace.
Please welcome Malcolm Jamal Warner.
Maybe he found a way to honor both his own experience and the experiences of the women who came forward. And maybe in being willing to sit with the discomfort of loving someone who might have done terrible things, he showed us all a more honest way to navigate the complicated realities of human relationships. I don't know what you think about all of this. The whole situation is just so heartbreaking and complicated, but I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. How do you think we should remember Malcolm Jamal Warner? And how do we hold space for the complexity of loving someone who might have hurt others? Let me know what you think, and make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of our coverage of stories like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.